our story, and we have the pleasure of having two very distinguished gentlemen with us this evening. One, Minister Bilal, Joseph Bilal, who is a world traveler, and he will be interviewing Dr. Graves, and he will give us some background on Dr. Graves, and we will begin. Minister Joseph.
Yes, sir. Thank you for being on your program. I think that it's interesting the name you have of your program, because it's time for our story as opposed to his story. And today we have a gentleman here, Dr. Graves, who is not a medical doctor, but one who is going to give us information on germ warfare. I would call him a germ warfare doctor. He will help us in giving information that will give us the checkup from the neck up, that we can avoid some of the pitfalls that are placed in our path as a people. I think that I've talked to Dr. Graves, and I find that he has very startling information. I find it true because I read the Global 2000 report on AIDS and how they were going to utilize it against particularly darker people 10 years ago. And one of the generals in the report said that he felt that 1 billion people had to go. And these 1 billion people, he said he didn't want to play God, but 1 billion people has to go. And then gave the names of all the generals in the report and some of the government officials. And interestingly enough, over the past 10 years since I've read that report, I see it happening. I see that when the 500,000 of the Tutus and the Hutus were fighting, they let them die, which is in accordance with that Global 2000 report. So I know that Dr. Graves has some very important information. He's, matter of fact, he has it government reports, and he is the author of a book called The State Origin. And this particular book, I'd like to bring it out for you. It's called State Origin, The Evidence of the Laboratory Birth of AIDS by Dr. Boyd E. Graves, J.D., lead plaintiff for AIDS apology. You know, Dr. Graves, as I look, you know, everyone has a name that's been given. The Bible says a good name is better than gold in Psalm 22:1. And when I look at the name Graves, but yet I see a doctor, I think that you're going to help us to avoid the grave. And I think that you also have an interesting point that is very vital, because the scriptures say our people are lost because of the lack of knowledge. So would you please enlighten us on why so many people are dying? I saw our people come to power in South Africa, but yet AIDS overcame them.
Absolutely.
And it looks very clear in terms of the Global 2000 plan to kill darker people. Could you explain some of these concerns you've found?
Well, you know, and I appreciate that very much, because it is all true that the AIDS virus appears to be the direct result of a century-long hunt for a contagious cancer that selectively kills. And by that I mean we have found the experiments and the contracts of a secret federal virus program entitled the U.S. Special Virus. Now, this program persisted in the United States from 1962 to 1978, and as many of us know, that this time frame preceded the onset of HIV and AIDS. We have also the quintessential missing link document entitled the U.S. Special Virus Flowchart document. Yes, sir. This document has held its own since its inception to public view in August of 1999. By that I mean, this document is the irrefutable missing link document of the development of HIV and AIDS.
Can you hold that out a minute there?
Yes, I can. Because people say, well, how do you know this is the document?
This is the United States government document?
Yes, it is.
Dr.
This is the research logic of the development of HIV. Here we have the immunological section of the virus development program, and many people often ask me, the initial question is, well, since they made it, is there a cure? The cure is located here in this section there of the experiments that were conducted under this program. That little box here at the end is the proliferation phase, where they released this special virus program as complement. in the vaccine programs that went to Africa in the smallpox vaccine, and in the experimental hepatitis B vaccine that went to homosexuals in Manhattan. But this document here has held its own in the last 2 years as being the irrefutable missing link document in the laboratory birth and laboratory origin of AIDS. And I am held as the discoverer of this, and up front people often say, how did you find it? This document is page 61 of one of the 15 progress reports of this experiment called the special virus.
Yes, sir.
This document is coordinated with 15 years of progress reports and experiments, and they total to about this high off the ground, the progress reports. Each one is some 400 pages apiece, and they detail every experiment and every contract as it relates to the coordinated effort to the flowchart document where that experiment and that contract fits into play. So we have found the experiments of this federal program, the U.S. Special Virus Program.
You know, people in America today are extremely frightened because of the anthrax scare. Well, actually, it's taken a lot of lives now, I think over 11. So what you're saying is that these diseases have their origin through a government implementation that, what you were explaining earlier, that is involved, you know, in terms of the motives, when you talk about the government's involvement in this special virus program enacted on the darker people, you spoke about the involvement of the government and the involvement of the government, and particularly the Bush family, who owns some of this, the pharmaceuticals companies.
Well, yes, there have always been players behind the scene. There has always been a power behind the throne, and we see this most graphically here in the United States as it relates to a little known but yet seemingly world powerful group called the Illuminati. The Illuminati has been behind the power of American politics and governments since the beginning of this country. They indeed have this plan of eradication of the black race, and they indeed are hell-bent on eradicating the black race from the planet face of the earth. We see this now as it relates to HIV and AIDS, in the sense that 70% of the deaths relative to HIV and AIDS are in the black community, and there's a reason for that. This AIDS virus has been particularly designed to seek out an affinity in the blood of the black population, a deficiency. In fact, we have a scientific paper to that effect, that stating from the Vanderbilt University, and I can hold that here now for you. It is the OKT4 epitope deficiency in the black population. What this paper, scientific paper, revealed that, and let's put it in layman's terms, if there were 10 blood samples on the table, our government can determine which of those are black and which of those are white. And what they found in the black blood was a deficiency in the OKT4 epitope as it relates to the black population. That deficiency is the central thing the HIV enzyme seeks out. HIV enzyme has an affinity towards this deficiency in the blood of the black population. This virus has been designed for the sole purposes of eradicating the black race and achieving the goals of a eugenics system. And the word eugenics is basically racism, intellectual racism that has permeated our country since the turn of the 20th century. Indeed, they are hell-bent on eradicating the black race from the planet of the earth. The scientific documents support that. Unfortunately, the epidemiology and the deaths of Africans and African Americans prove it.
Why?
Yeah, why would, have you found out some of the reasoning behind this insanity?
Well, some of the reasoning is as it relates to this point. They felt that African and African Americans were so much more sexually active in their procreation abilities that if they didn't devise a scheme, that there would be fear of a black planet. In essence, that is the reason why they have sought in a hell-bent fashion to eradicate the black race. fear of a black planet. They recognize that from a genealogical standpoint, from a physiological standpoint, that the Caucasian race cannot procreate at a rate equal to that of the black population. And as a result of that, and these documents go back to the 1940s and even beyond, but we have a 1948 State Department top secret memo which addresses this very point, that indeed if the United States did not devise a scheme to deal with the burgeoning populations of the Third World, that by the turn of the century, the gross national product of the United States would be so overwhelmed with feeding starving mouths from primarily sub-Saharan Africa, that indeed our country would be weakened from a national security standpoint. So they've been at this for a long period of time because they are saying to either feed them or get rid of them. They have chosen to get rid of them.
Mr. Lau,
Yes,
didn't
sir.
you speak about that Global 2000? Can you add something to that so we understand concretely this floor plan?
Yeah, in the Global 2000 report, which is a government release, there, as I stated earlier, was comprised of generals, government officials, in a massive plan to annihilate the African and African American people and people of a darker hue. And they stated specifically that they wanted to get rid of all these people. And as I said, the general said that he didn't want to play God, but 1 billion people had to go. They felt that there would be an overpopulation and food shortage, and even some famine reports. What I've seen is that they have seen these things and understand them primarily through a lot of prophecy, a lot of understanding. Some of the things he talked about, just about 1948, in putting this process this genocide in play. 1948 was an interesting year because in 1948 there was a plan devised also in the earth, and that plan was to set up the state of Israel in 1948 and set up the state of South Africa in 1948. So we find now with the massive levels of people who are dying from AIDS in South Africa, who thought they would come to power. And this was a part of the Global 2000, which I read 10 years ago, that grieved me deeply to see this process and to see the Hutus fighting, and 500,000 died and they did nothing. It was obvious that this was a plan. When a few people die in Israel, that it's a catastrophe. But I think some of the things that Dr. Graves brought out was a congressional letter by Congressman Trafficante. This letter was primarily issued for the concern of the special virus report on AIDS. And also, this is from the GAO response to the letter. Trafficante, I think, is a congressman who is very angry with America, and they're trying to stop him also. But today, interestingly enough, he made a statement today on CNN television. The statement was that if they didn't stop what was going on in Palestine, it would bring about a third world war. So the truth is coming out today, and people such as yourself, Dr. Graves, bringing these issues out. I think God brought us to this country that we may be a separate nation within a nation, that we would have to stand and be the mouthpiece within this nation. And being so oppressed, it would cause us to be reactionary to the oppression, but yet we would have to speak, out, because if you crush your people, truth will rise again. So I think we don't have any weapons, but we have a weapon in our mouth that God has given to speak the truth. Can you tell us something about the military report you have over
Yes, I can. I appreciate you mentioning, this report as well. What we have here is the cover page of the military review from November of 1970. And one of the titles of one of the papers in this report is entitled Ethnic Weapons.
Mm-hmm.
This is November of 1970. So for those of us who did not or don't want to believe that our government has been persisting in this venue of developing ethno-specific weapons, here is the top journal from the United States Army for the sole purposes of discussing ethnic weapons. and what they could and could not do in November of 1970. And as you'll know from a historical standpoint, that the AIDS virus developed itself some 10 years later. We also have, and I don't have the slides for it here or the overhead, but we also have the congressional testimony from June 9 of 1969, where the Pentagon testified under oath that they were developing a contagious cancer, a synthetic biological agent for which no natural immunity could have been acquired. It is the first definition of AIDS some 10 years before the first case of AIDS. That's June of 1969. So this venue of developing ethno-specific weapons for the purposes of depopulation and population control go back all throughout the 20th century. As I've said before, a century-long hunt for a contagious cancer that selectively kills. And I'll add into the great eugenics philosopher Bertrand Russell, who states that they have no problem getting rid of all of these unwanted people so that the white people who will be left behind will procreate freely. This is all about the white man's inability to procreate at a level to allow their race to survive. So their response is to decimate the procreation abilities of the black race, since they can't compete from a standpoint of procreation.
Let me ask you, when you speak about this military review, I have an article here from the Time magazine, and they've got our people on the front line in this article here. It's called Down and Dirty, and dirty is over here by the African American, who we know is not really dirty, and they got white over here on the down. So it seems this conspiracy is just moves on like a hidden warfare. How would you describe some of the anthrax diseases and things of that nature that are going on? You spoke earlier about there being a concern with the pharmaceutical companies, and how do the pharmaceutical companies interplay in this?
Well, they interplay in a very, very direct way. As it relates to African Americans in U.S. military situations, we do have a document from the Nixon administration which addresses this point of pushing African Americans to the front lines so that there will be more African American casualties. These are, again, documented venues of this government, which, as I often say to everyone, things are not as they seem. They certainly are not.
Verify it right here again.
Yes, again,
What
I mean,
you're saying.
it is so apropos and it is so accurate. But indeed, there appears to be something going on behind the curtain as it relates to this government and how it treats its African American citizens and how it will treat us in the future. We will not be here if we don't wake up today.
Well, you know, Nixon said in one of his reports that communism was not the threat to the world that Islam was. So we know that a part of this war and him being the president, he set a lot of the agenda.
Yes, he did. And he also set the public law. Many people are unaware that there is a public law as it relates to population control. On March 16, 1970, President Nixon signed Public Law 91-213, which authorized John D. Rockefeller III to be the population czar for the United States of America. And one of the recommendations that John D. Rockefeller made as chairman of that commission was to, as they call it, population stabilization. We call it population control. But indeed, the public law is in the records. I implore all of us to take a look. Public Law 91-213, signed by Richard Nixon on March 16, 1970. It is one of the more hideous documents that I've ever viewed from a public law standpoint of the United States of America. But the fact of the matter is, all of these documents, many of which I'm displaying, are government documents from our government. So this is not the rant and ravings of some degree of lunacy. This is the rant and ravings of someone who has looked under the rock and has found the government documents which conclusively prove our government has spent the entire 20th century developing a contagious cancer that selectively kills, selectively impacts the African American community. And I want to address one further point on the drug company standpoint and who knows and those kinds of things. We have found that it appears that the Cipro and anthrax scare that is currently going about the nation appears to be a farce generated out of Nazi Germany, the home company of Bayer, the pharmaceutical company Bayer. That the vaccine company here in the United States, Bioport, The stock of that company is primarily held by two entities. One, the former president, George Herbert Walker Bush, and two, the Bin Laden family. If you will check Bioport stocks, you'll find that the Bin Laden family and the Bush families are the principal owners of the anthrax vaccine development here in the United States. They're the only company in the United States that's producing the anthrax vaccine. And if you go just a little bit further, you will find that the control center for the World Trade Center debacle on September 11th, the control center for the timing, movements, and the money all came out of Nazi Germany.
Yeah, I think that what he's saying is very profound, because on the document I have over here on page 269 in Message to the Black Man, the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad stated that America and Germany were the two most wicked people. And you're talking about Bayer. I'm from Connecticut, and Bayer, the company is there that produces Cipro. And if you look at for the past 20 years or so, you'll find that most of your presidents come out of New Haven, Connecticut, where I was born. If you look at Clinton, you look at Bush, you look at his father, you go back to President Ford, you find that part of the region of the earth has not only the pharmaceutical companies that Bush is involved with, but when you spoke about Rockefeller, his involvement, having a piece of the rock and owning the oil and being in position himself is still a part of this. This whole process, I think, is relative to this book I've just purchased this year. It's called Oil, God, and Gold. And in the oil itself, we find that everything is related to oil. I mean, if you drove here, it was through oil. Electricity, they have to use oil for that. Your cameras that we're doing the video, it's oil. The clothes we have on is oil. We live in a very oily world, but we don't realize that we're fish from the oily world.
Well, there is also this comment that has come out recently, that apparently in 1998 there was a meeting held by the powers that be, that indeed they felt they had to replace the government of Afghanistan for the Taliban, if you would, for the purposes of having access to the oil underneath. There's some portion of the country there that has this immense amount of oil. So that back in 1998, they knew they had to devise a scheme to create a war within the Afghan border, within the country of Afghanistan, and we're seeing that currently. But let me go back to the German and American kind of conscious. Few people are aware that following World War II, the United States imported, and beginning in 1946, it was called Project Paperclip. Every Nazi scientist and biologist was brought vis-a-vis an underground railroad into the United States. They came into a hub in Houston, the MD Anderson Medical Center, and from there they were given name changes and dispersed throughout the United States. But the United States imported every Nazi biological scientist, and people have to say what for. The reason is, following World War II, even as it relates to Russia, the powers of the world at that point decided that there would be no more white-on-white crime. Now, we've had sporadic incidences of white crime on white-on-white wars, but they decided no more white-on-white crime. It was the beginning of the end for the black race and the black population, because the German scientists brought in something that few people know about. In the genetic sequencing of HIV and AIDS is an Icelandic sheep disease, wasting disease, called Visna, V-I-S-N-A, which was developed by the Germans. As we began the Tuskegee syphilis experiments in 1931, we were also testing AIDS on the sheep in Iceland. It's a matter of documented fact. The Icelandic sheep disease and the genetic sequencing of AIDS, and since this came from Nazi Germany, the Visna, thus far, no government official in the United States will address this issue of how people with HIV and AIDS have an Icelandic sheep disease from Nazi Germany in their blood system. And the question I have been posing, not only here in the United States, but around the world, and that is this. How does an Icelandic sheep and an African green monkey co-mingle in 1930, but for the fact that one or the other of those animals would have had to have had a pilot's license?
You know, interestingly enough, again, I think that what you're saying about Germany keeps coming up, and I think that this Germany and its involvement in germ warfare is very interesting because in New Haven, Connecticut, we have the organization of the Skull and Bones
Yes.
at Yale, and the Skull and Bones was actually incorporated by Germans.
Absolutely.
So there is an involvement, as he's stating, it's all coming out now. Or as the Bible said, there's nothing hidden that will not be revealed in this day.
Yes.
What do you think about, you know, I've read document number 42. Document number 42, National Security Document.
46 is it?
42, that particular document.
The one?
Under Jimmy Carter by Zygmunt.
46, NSCM 46.
He spoke about black people, how to keep them divided, how to cause disruptions in organizations, keeping us divided from Arabs because they said that we're related to them sometime by blood and spirit. And they talked about not letting the black man get united with the African to keep that division because 60% of the oil that went to Europe went through the Cape of South Africa. So these are government documents. I've seen them myself. I understand exactly what you're saying.
Yes, sir.
What would you suggest that we, as a people, because there's two sides of every coin, what are some of the things we could do to create a defense against this type of Holocaust that they're trying to bring on our people?
You know, our best defense is our own awakening, our own intellectual awakening. We believe that our efforts are creating an African-American intellectual renaissance. We believe that our efforts are like a catalytic reaction that will carry black people not only through the next hundreds of years, but for the next thousands of years. It is our awakening of our intellectual prowess that will carry us. Without our awakening, since we are relatively comatose in the black community, if we have our sports, our music, our movies, and our religion, you virtually can't tell black people anything. What we are trying to do with this concrete documentation and this concrete evidence is awaken the sleeping intellectuality of not only black America, but black Africa as well. We believe that we can do it. It's evidenced on our website at boydgraves.com that people are looking at this information. It is being taken seriously. We are building a tsunami of public outrage as it relates to our call for review of this U.S. Special Virus Program. We feel that if we get this review of this U.S. Special Virus Program, we will begin the process of saving ourselves.
You know, I think that some of the things that we have in our favor, because from what you're saying, it looks very bleak, but the scripture said behind every dark cloud is a silver lining. Now that we have come into the millennium, and we are facing the effects of the Jubilee, where you see the World Trade Conference, that people, there, as Minister Brown says, their own children are throwing bricks out there. We see people revolting. We see African Americans seeking reparations at the Durban conference. We see that the earth is actually moving not according to their plan, but according to God's plan for the Jubilee. But we're in an interesting time that I had opportunity to research down at Yale. This time is not only the 50th year of the Jubilee, which comes every year, but it's the 50,000th year Jubilee called the Shemitah in Hebrew. And when that time comes, there's a world change. So you see people in Zimbabwe wanting their land according to the Jubilee spirit. You see the black farmers here wanting their land because Jubilee deals with land and it deals with the emancipation of slaves. So I think that there are two forces moving in the world. The forces of darkness is moving, but the force of light. But we know that there are more days of light in a year than there are cold. In the coldest of the weather, there's more light. So God has equated out that we will overcome. I think that the information you're given is very vital. It's a step towards us improving ourselves and becoming aware from the levels that they would try to affect us, not only physically, but now from what you're saying, what you've shown, which I believe, to try to affect us in terms of germ warfare. But Let me say this here. From what I see, that they are being attacked from the economic side. The World Trade Center, they lost $500 million the first day that the stock market opened. And I had 3 offices on Wall Street. And what it's designed to do, they have the GDRs, the Global Deposit Receipts, and that determines on what you invest into another country. But the Global Deposit Receipts, they're grabbing money out of the United States. And there's a problem. The Bush came on yesterday, he went to a factory and said that he's in the factory and see what I could do, how we could help the economy. Well, this is all some of the Hollywood antics he learned from his father's friend Ronald Reagan. So we see that, you know, man makes a plan, as it states in the Quran, and God makes a plan, but God is the best of planners. So I see them being eaten up from an economic side. There are job losses. They said 3 million jobs will be lost this quarter. You know, there are problems with countries that don't agree with their policy of genocide. That's why Trafficante, the one who's working on that special virus report you submitted, stated that if they don't get out of Palestine, there'll be a 3rd World War. So we know that God is in the mix of all of this. But I believe after my world travels that black people in this country are the smartest people that I've seen on the earth. They've had access to more information. So the job that you have before you, the capability to have television and shows such as Minister Brown's show is such an advantage to us as a people, because when I came up, we only had 2 channels, Channel 8 and Channel 3. So we were limited on information, no CNN, no History Channel. So I think that if you could speak a little bit more on this, because what the information that you found is, it's no surprise to me, because I could tell by your intellect that you're capable, number one. Can you give me, first of all, can you give me a little of your background, because it is stated that not does a man get what he wishes or prays for, but only that which he is.
Well, I appreciate that. I am originally from the Northeast Ohio area, and was class president in high school, and a number of debate and chess club and Christian club, and winner of a number of oratorical contests, and received an appointment to the United States Naval Academy. I was a freshman, a plebe as they call it there, in 1971. I graduated from Annapolis and served as a communications officer in the United States Navy on board a guided missile destroyer. Indeed, in that capacity, I had a very unique position. With my top secret clearance, I had the cryptologic key codes for release of our nuclear weapons, a job I took very much pride in. I went from there with some other jobs in the private sector, and then went on to law school, where I graduated law school in December of '92. So I come to the table with a wealth of human experience, myself, that I didn't just fall off the turnip truck yesterday as relates to this issue. My 9 years of research are a matter of public record. The comments of the experts, the 15 to 20 scientists and medical doctors who have reviewed my work, their comments are posted on my website. Again, I put out the public challenge to our community, and that is, this information is available if you so seek to find it. And by that I mean, please go to the website. If there's information there that you dispute or you have a question about, then cross-reference it. All of our research is from government documents of this government. It is all hidden, but it can all be found. We have found it. We have found the flowchart document, which is indeed the missing link as it relates to the true genesis of AIDS. The wellspring of the genesis of AIDS is the United States government. We have proven that.
What is your website again?
Yes, the website is www.voidgraves.com.
Can you deal with that floor chart? Can you kind of give us a run through?
Well, I like doing it in layman's terms, because it is scientificalese. You've heard the term legalese or medicalese. It's scientificalese. And what I'll say here is that, going back to the flowchart document, and I'll do it in 2 parts. Let's hold this here for 1 second, and let me just say what the government says about this flowchart document. I'll hold this one here first. This is a May 15, 2000 letter from Dr. Victoria Cargill, the Chief Medical Officer for the Office of AIDS Research for our government.
Yes, sir.
Upon my challenge, Dr. Cargill went into the annals of the National Cancer Institute, and she located the flowchart in the basement of our government. And she writes specifically on May 15, 2000, that I'm writing to inform you that I have located the flowchart on the human immunodeficiency virus. This is from our government. Dr. Victoria Cargill is now the top AIDS doctor in the United States under Dr. David Satcher. Dr. Cargill has run and hid. She will not respond to her May 15, 2000 letter. We are demanding her, by the number of people who send her daily emails on this issue, to respond to her location of the flowchart document in the annals of our government of the National Cancer Institute. Dr. Cargill needs to come forward and allow the government and demand the government to explain this flowchart document, since it is their document. But in that same vein, we will look at the flowchart document here now. And I will point here just ever so briefly. What you see here across this array is the research logic, and if we can hold it just a little bit more straight up for the camera's sake, is the research logic. It even says research logic here, the development of a special virus. Let me just also say, viruses are not special one amongst another unless we make it so. That is why the name of this program is Special Virus. This virus is special because it has an affinity towards a deficiency in the blood of the black population. And we know this by the epidemiological evidence, with 70% of the deaths being in black and African communities. But what this document is doing here is that in this initial phase, it is selecting parameters for immunodeficiency. And it states that also. It is selecting parameters of, they're even surveying twins, they're surveying cousins for the vertical transition of blood markers in families, but also it relates to the sexual transition of blood markers as it goes vertically. So they're going horizontal and vertical, whichever those are, vertical here and horizontal. But this is all being done in this initial phase. What they did was, we were speaking a little bit about anthrax. And these black boxes here are the decision points all along the process of the development of AIDS, of the 15-year history of this program. And they could have dropped it. It says drop if they didn't meet all of these parameters in the black boxes all the way along the line. But you know, we have a virus that depletes the immune system. This is the chart that develops a virus that depletes the immune system. We can surmise from the sudden onset of HIV and AIDS that this program went through to completion here, the final phase there, the proliferation phase. As they complemented the vaccine programs that went to Africa, the smallpox vaccine, the United States was the only country to supply Africa with the smallpox vaccines in the clinical trial section here at the end of this flowchart document. And the United States attached this AIDS special virus to the experimental hepatitis B vaccine that went to Manhattan and the homosexuals there. White homosexuals were recruited for this experimental hepatitis B. And people say, well, if they were trying to kill black people, why were white homosexuals recruited for this final phase here? White homosexuals were recruited for the purposes of this. They wanted reliable persons for this experimental hepatitis B vaccine, for it to incubate into the homosexual community. And they chose white homosexuals because primarily they had an address and a phone number. And they were able to come back for the second and the third follow-up shots that they needed to incubate the virus into the homosexual community. That's why they chose white homosexuals. And as we all know, this disease manifested itself here in the United States in 1980 as a white homosexual disease. In fact, the terminology, nothing to do with this flowchart, was a gay-related immunodeficiency disease. But we can show immunodeficiency and this immunological control section here is indeed where the cures are. The cure experiments were conducted under phase 4A of this flowchart document. And people say readily, well, what is the cure? What did they find? They found a drug called N-dimethyl rifampicin. N-D-E-M-E-T-H-Y-L. Rifampicin. R-I-F-A-M-P-I-C-I-N. N-dimethyl rifampicin was identified in this section to stop the U.S. special virus in its tracks. We are calling for an immediate review, and to start our review with the cure experiments conducted under this federal program, because our cause and our purpose is clear. We can show that the AIDS virus has been put together. We must now work together to dismantle this federal virus program. So that's what this flowchart document does. It is the quintessential missing link document proof that indeed the United States government created, produced, proliferated, and has state managed this U.S. Special Virus Program. And that's where the Congressman's review comes in, that indeed the $550 million this program spent is taxpayer money, U.S. taxpayer money. We are demanding that accountability from the General Accounting Office, and we think that we will get this review.
You said something about black women being the highest
Fastest growing group coming down with HIV and AIDS.
And you juxtaposed that to the beginning with white males, and you said if it was...
Well, the question that we posed to the government, which they seemingly can't answer, in addition to the Icelandic sheep and the green monkey, is this question. How does a white homosexual disease transform itself into a health problem for black women? No one in this government can yet answer that question.
My Lord, you know, it's really interesting listening to Dr. Graves, because as I looked at the truths in the scripture, I found that every time that God brought judgment to a society, he brought it through slaves. If you look in the Bible, Daniel was a slave who found that when he looked at the wall and saw the writing, many tekel upharsin, that the kingdom was numbered and would come to an end, but it took a slave to do this. So I think that, and then Joseph was a slave. The Bible tells us again that we would go through this process, calling it Revelation 11 and 8, calling it, well, it says that great city which is spiritually called Sodom in Egypt. And Sodom was because of the homosexuals where they get the word sodomy from. And then Egypt because they would be slaves again in the last days. So, you know, it seems that, you know, what God is saying in this is that our people are the only voice of reason that will be established as it has always been in biblical times. You know, also Revelation talks about plagues killing many of the people on earth. So how do you see this with Global 2000 and they're thinking that they're making a plan, but it's already written in Scripture? How do you see this playing out today?
Well, you know, I see a very dangerous thing happening here, that we accept Scripture. Sometimes we accept it wholeheartedly.
Mm-hmm.
They know we accept Scripture. Therefore, if they create a plague, many of us will believe it came from Scripture and from some preordained destiny.
Mm-hmm.
That may not necessarily be true. However, since we accept Scripture in the fashion that we do, it makes it very easy for us in our comatose mentality to believe indeed that this plague syndrome is a naturally occurring phenomenon, when indeed it is not. We can show here, and that's what this flowchart document does. And remember, this document does not come by itself. It is attached to 6,000 pages of experiments and contracts, and they are all coordinated from A to Z to the end of this document. So if we had this flowchart document just by itself, we would have a tougher fight. But we don't. We have 6,000 pages of every experiment and every contract as it relates to the development of AIDS and this plague.
I'd like to know, how was the plan executed, and what has been the impact on Africa, and what would be the future impact?
I appreciate that. Let me just say, the plan was executed by attaching this U.S. special virus. Between March of 1977 and June of 1978, the U.S. Special Virus Program produced 60,000 liters of AIDS. They complemented the vaccines that went to Africa, the smallpox vaccines. The United States was the only country to send smallpox vaccines.
Can you explain the word liters, because it sounds like
it sounds like liters, L-I-T-E-R, 60,000 liters, which translates to 15,000 gallons.
Okay.
Yes, they made 15,000 gallons of AIDS, but they mixed it in with the smallpox vaccines that went to Africa. How do we know this? As smallpox ended in Africa, AIDS began in mass infection.
Yeah, but where is the court? I mean, can you come closer to a definitive or a smoking gun?
Well, you know, the smoking gun is indeed this federal program. Many of us have never previously known that there was a federal virus development program. This is indeed the smoking gun in this sense. We have definitive proof of a U.S. federal virus development program, and we are demanding that this program be reviewed.
Now, they took the AIDS virus, mixed it with smallpox, and then began where in Africa? I'd like to try to...
Well, I think what we see in Africa is this, that, and this is from an epidemiological standpoint, that if there was a prior case of AIDS in Africa, and from that one monkey and one African became 2 people and became 4 people, the natural doubling factor, then we would not have seen the specific explosion that occurred in 1979 and the mass infections of AIDS as it relates to the mass inoculations vis-a-vis the smallpox vaccine program. So from an epidemiological standpoint, we can show that something occurred inside of those smallpox vaccines that impacted the onset of HIV and AIDS and mass infection. Now, not only that, according to Dr. Basil Wainwright from Nairobi, Kenya, within 65 years, at the current trend of things, there will be no more black Africans on the continent of Africa by the year 2066.
Right.
That is a dreadful, dreadful fact, but it is reality.
Let me go back. Now, I just want to follow the trail. They began smallpox inoculation. Where in Africa? And can we look at that and see the impact of that in terms of development of AIDS today?
Yeah, from an
follow
sure.
smallpox.
From an epidemiological standpoint, the United States indeed administered the smallpox vaccines sub-Saharan Africa and below, initially with the exception of South Africa. Now, something has happened, like a stage 2 or phase 2 follow-up, to have thoroughly decimated South Africa. But initially, they stopped from sub-Saharan Africa to just above South Africa.
Now, what countries is that? Tanzania?
Well, Tanzania, Kenya, the Congo, Sudan. I don't have a map in front of me. I've seen the map where the inoculations went. And they also state unequivocally in the NSCM document, which we were just talking about, the NSCM 46, that Africa's resources are a higher priority than Africa's people. So as you see,
that again?
Yeah, Africa's resources.
Is what they said.
Absolutely. Africa's resources are a higher priority than Africa's people. And we see that entire scenario being played out in this sense. 200 Africans die every hour from HIV and AIDS. 5,000 Africans die every day from this government special virus program. They are eradicating the black race from the continent of Africa right before our eyes. We have been fragmented here as black Americans, almost identical to the lines identified in that document, NSCM 46, that as black Americans became more aware the United States was depopulating Africa, they put in plan this project to decimate the intellectual community and the black community, to fragment and stratify us so that we would be powerless in the midst of them achieving their goals of eradicating the black race from the continent of Africa. It goes on further than that, though, with respect to the eugenics movement. They have this expression, eugenics, which is eradication racism, eugenics by any means necessary, and they are hell-bent on maintaining the slave posture, the slave mentality of the black community. They will give you your sports, they will give you your music and movies, and they will give you your religion, because soon we will not be here if we don't wake up.
Now, this was carried out by the World Health Organization.
They are a part of it.
Can you explain who carried it out?
Yes, the World Health Organization is a misnomer. They have a misnomer group. They have this plan of dealing with the world's health from a humanitarian standpoint. But the dirty little secret is that that's not really who they are.
Right.
It's almost like what the FBI did back in 1946, 48, that CONINTELPRO, as it related to going into the lives of black Americans, dissecting us, keeping files on us in every way. The World Health Organization is part and parcel to the onset of HIV and AIDS.
That's right.
This venue of a one world government is real. New World Order. I know we have all heard that terminology. That venue is real. The World Health Organization is not whom you think they are. They are a part of this diabolical, centrally evil plan.
That's true.
To indeed assist this process of eliminating 1 billion of the world's people.
Right.
They really don't care.
Now, there was an AIDS conference held in South Africa in which the president of South Africa, or one of the presidents,
President Mbeki,
kind of understood, I think, what you were saying and wanted to go another route with natural herbs and everything. Can you speak on that?
Yes, I can.
And then talk about why he was so attacked and the players behind this
Right.
whole structure to bring him down.
Right. I think what you see is this battle, as has been mentioned, of good versus evil, ongoing, deep-rooted, spiritual in nature, religious-oriented, of a battle of good versus evil. In my opinion, there appears to be much more evil than good. The few who choose to stand up for the good, Martin Luther King, for example, they quickly undercut you in every way possible. And that's the same thing that's happened with President Mbeki. President Mbeki is also a signer on to my email, on my website, with respect to this information. And for that, we're grateful. We are getting a number of fresh calls daily, email calls daily, from South African chemists, biochemists, and the like, scientists. The world is aware of what we're doing here in the United States. We are so proud of our efforts, even those in New York who have formed a small group and have gotten out a pamphlet of information that is direct and to the point. President Mbeki is in the same vein as we ourselves. Now, what we are doing relative to South Africa is we're trying to extend the dialogue because it is so important, and our country is trying to dismantle me in the process. So I know what it feels like to have my phone beeping and tapping and beeping and tapping and calls being cut off. We have the mail delayed for 7 to 10 days once somebody sent me a letter from maybe even just 60 miles away. So I see it on a day-to-day basis, the processes of evil. And that's what President Mbeki is up against, is that the moment he stood up with his neck above the crowd to say something isn't quite right here, the forces of evil came after him in a very rude fashion. They even were trying to get him down from his presidency, as I even understand. But we're standing strong and we're trying to go forward. But indeed, we are on the right track. These government documents are quintessential proof that our government has persisted in a federal virus development program. And we demand, and we're calling for that demand for an independent, immediate review of this flowchart and the 15 yearly progress reports of this secret federal virus program. We have definitive proof. It is time. We must let nature determine the finish line for the human race, not man.
Let me ask you this question. Minister Bilal, please.
Joseph.
Mr. Joseph. You said there's a cure in this, with thousands and thousands of people dying every day. Do we have to depend on that cure, or how can we get to the cure? If there's a cure, then how do we break through to the cure?
I appreciate that. Where we are at today with respect to my research is this. I need funding to go into the cure experiments, to come out with a definitive thesis as to what the proper steps are for us to take our own leadership and solve and dismantle this federal virus. The cure is identified. This federal virus program, the AIDS virus program, is like every other federal program. We all know, those of us who have had affiliation with the military, that the military and our government does not develop programs that they don't have a remedy or antidote for. This federal virus program is identically the same as that, i.e., on page 24 of the 1971 progress report, which is progress report number 8 of this program, the cure is identified. We are ready to go forward. We need the backing. We need the public exposure as we're getting now. And again, even as we're doing with our group here locally, could I see that one promo there? Even as we're doing here locally, is that we are challenging the mindset first of our own people and then of the larger society as a whole. Here, you didn't just contract AIDS. The United States gave it to you. We are waking up the masses so that we can address on our own, the cure experiments that will save humanity. And it's truly that critical. Because, as we mentioned anthrax here on a number of times today, the experts are saying there is a huge degree of similarity between AIDS and anthrax. Your government didn't just contract AIDS. The United States gave it to you. What we're saying is this. We can solve AIDS today. We need your help.
One other question. You mentioned anthrax. Is there a relationship or is there a thread that will run from AIDS or the controlling of people to the bombing of the World Trade Center, or is there a overhaul arching plan that these two intersect in the development?
Well, you better believe that they do. The one word that's missing, I haven't mentioned it today, I will mention it now. It is what it's called a mycoplasma, M-Y-C-O-P-L-A-S-M-A. You hear often anthrax spores. Well, those spores are the mycoplasma. It's a six-sided little figure that is at the heart of human disease. Not only AIDS and anthrax, but arthritis, chronic fatigue syndrome, Gulf War syndrome. All of these are this mycoplasma. What they found was, back in like 1843, that the tobacco mosaic plant had this spotted leaf disease, a contagion disease, where they transferred that from plant to animal to human. And at the heart of AIDS is the identical infectious disease particle at the heart of anthrax from the tobacco mosaic virus, this thing called mycoplasma. You knock out the mycoplasma in AIDS and anthrax, you knock out the disease. It is virtually just that simple.
Well, how can you do that?
As you know, you're using antibiotics as it relates to dealing with the infectious nature of anthrax. Mm-hmm. Believe it or not, the antibiotic doxycycline achieves the same purpose as it relates to HIV and AIDS. That indeed, the mycoplasma is the motor engine that allows HIV/AIDS to go from one cell to the next. It is the motor engine in cancer that allows the infectious agent to go from one cell to the next, and then you have a tumor. That is the buildup of the tumor. Mm-hmm. By knocking out the motor, the mycoplasma, the tumor cannot grow, and indeed, a person will not come down with the cancer. It's also, let me just say for the record, first time I've said this, breast cancer has this six-sided infectious agent in breast cancer as well. It is all the same agent permeating human disease.
Okay, do you know how to kill it?
Well, again, I'm saying that antibiotics here on an initial front, impede the progress of this. They call it colonizing, when it goes from one cell to the next, and as you see, then you see a tumor, a buildup. The antibiotics do affect it. This drug, Rifampicin, according to their own documents, does kill it. I found another drug, levamisole, that apparently kills it. Again, I'm on the threshold of the cure experiment. I need funding in which to do that. I can't undertake that portion of this project without funding.
Mm-hmm. One final question. I have a lot of other questions, but I'll ask you a final question on this. The World Trade Center bombing, can you speak to that in what you feel might be a relationship to the extermination of African people to the one world government?
Absolutely.
To taking over? You see a correlation?
Well, I do see a correlation, but I appreciate it more when that correlation comes from others. Okay. When I have a plethora of scientists and medical doctors and researchers and bioterrorism experts who say that there appears to be some connection with the progress that we were making with the congressman and the GAO July 19. August 20th, the GAO responds back saying that it's going to go to an upper level investigation into this U.S. Special Virus Program. Then boom, September 11th, the term they're using about my research is that you have been World Trade Center, that the momentum that we have built, our process is irreversible. They've slowed us down by the World Trade Center fiasco. But again, it does appear to be an inside job. Many of us can't possibly believe that some foreign entities can come into the United States, hijack 4 airplanes at the same time for the diabolical purposes that were conducted. It goes beyond our accepted level of reasoning in the sense that we can't believe that that could possibly happen in light of all the Central Intelligence stuff that goes on in this country. What they're also saying is that the President's associates, on the Friday before the World Trade Center bombing, sold their insurance and airliner stocks vis-a-vis an insider stock trade relative to the knowledge of the event to take place. Now,
Who did that?
the emails say the President's associates. I can certainly provide you those emails so that you can read them for yourself. The emails are also saying that Osama bin Laden has been on the payroll of the Central Intelligence Agency. I don't know if you all have heard that or not, but that's a documented fact as well. So what are we seeing and dealing with here? Our country has a habit of holding out a bad guy syndrome, i.e. Saddam Hussein, Ayatollah Khomeini, but you know, we've never gone in and those people are still on the planet. We seemingly always have to have a bad guy syndrome so that the mindset of humanity, and this isn't just African Americans, the mindset of humanity can be raped to the standpoint to believe that there is our enemy. But you know, and I'll go one step further and say this venue of patriotism, which came about on the heels of the World Trade Center, and the stock market was closed there for a number of days. If we were so patriotic, when the stock market opened on that following Monday, why wasn't there a rise in the stock market rather than what we saw? All the white people running to get their money.
Dr. Grace, we want to thank you, and we want you to stay right where you are while we go into the second phase of this interview with